Well,
Yeah.
it does look like we are live. Dahlia, thank you so much for taking time out of your very busy day to speak with me. I know it's kind of late in the evening where you are. It is about 1 o'clock in the afternoon on the East Coast of the United States. A little more than 24 hours since the United States and Israel launched a joint operation that thus far has resulted in the death of the Ayatollah. And there are so many unknowns going forward. Uh, let's introduce ourselves. My name is Mark Leon Goldberg. I'm the host of Global Dispatches, this very podcast.
I'm Dalia Dassa Kaye, a senior fellow at the Burkle Center at UCLA and author of Enduring Hostility, The Making of America's Iran Policy.
So I have a copy of your book here to promote. Literally wrote the book on U.S. policy towards Iran. And before we get into, the events of the last, 24 to 48 hours, I'm curious to learn from you, Dahlia, why? Why did the United States on February 28th embark in a regime change campaign against the government of Iran?
Well, thank you for having me again, Mark. It's really nice to be with you. I think I posted this earlier today or yesterday that I'm a little hesitant to do book promotion really when such an awful, war is happening, people are dying. So I feel badly to do that, but it is true that it does very much relate to unfortunately the issues of the day. The challenge though is that I wrote about U.S. policy for now nearly half a century in the hostility. But there's really no precedent for what just happened over the last day. And in fact, there is really good reasons why no previous U.S. president chose to cross the cross over that line to a direct attack on Iran until Trump chose to do it last June, 2025. But this time is even has gone further. Now we're really talking about what appears to be very expansive regime change goals pretty explicitly. And so we really never seen this before. So while we've had this very hostile relationship, anti-Americanism, attacks on both sides, they're basically the policy attempts at talking, but generally the policy has kind of gone back to containment, isolation, pressure. We've never gone into this direct military confrontation. So I think the bottom line is we're kind of at a new normal. This is something unprecedented. And so it's harder to draw some of the lessons from the past, although I think there are still some that could be relevant. But I think we very much need to also understand that context can really change things and we need to adapt our thinking to a new environment, which is, I think, what we're really facing as we speak.
So there were several stated justifications by the Trump administration for doing this, ranging from some that seem kind of outlandish and not credible to me, like the Iran was about to strike the United States itself with like an intercontinental ballistic missile that they don't possess, to that they still contain ambitions to develop a nuclear weapon. um, what kind of most resonates for you about, like, why is it that, Trump pulled the trigger here?
Yeah, and I think this is what's really key. I think this is a very personal war, actually. I really think in the end, this is Trump's war. Yes, the Israelis wanted it. It's no secret. Bibi Netanyahu has wanted this war for a very long time, but it would not have happened without U.S. blessing, without U.S. support, and without U.S. involvement, given that we have the military capabilities that even the Israelis don't. And I think at the end of the day, what I come down to, and we didn't know up until a couple of days ago, we weren't sure, what does he really want? We were all confused, I think, as you laid out. What are the goals? He said the nuclear sites were obliterated after the June war, right? Yes, they have missile capabilities, but nothing that was the ICBM, the idea that they could attack America, is just false. That's just it's not possible right now, according to any public intelligence assessment. So there was no imminent risk of an Iranian attack on the United States. Yes, they continue to be able to target our forces in the region, as we very unfortunately saw today. The news I just saw today where 3 U.S. servicemen were killed. So they can reach us there, but there was no imminent. So I think what I come down to is it was kind of a opportune moment that basically I think there was a decision made. Yes, there was this diplomacy. It's not clear. I don't want to call it a charade, but it's not clear how genuine it ultimately was, because I think that the president likely made the decision probably weeks ago, and there's planning that they were going this direction. And this is in the context of the uprisings, the protests that are massive in Iran and the massive slaughtering of Iranians in mid-January. And this set the whole thing in place. So it was Trump's original social truth, his social media posting that we're going to come to your rescue. And then it wasn't thought through. Nothing's ever thought through. Again, we have to remember this is such a different, even from Trump won. This is such an erratic presidency. There's no normal decision-making process. So basically, he set up this position that said the U.S. was going to come to your aid. And in mid-January, even the Israelis were saying, we're not ready for what may hit us. And so it took 6 weeks, nearly 2 months of preparation, massive buildup to be ready to give the option. And I think ultimately, and President Trump really said it in his initial message, I'm doing what no other president did before me. And I think that's maybe the best explanation. I mean, I can't get into his head, of course, but and it's, I think futile to try to discern motivations. But based on his actions and the way he looks at things and frames things, everything's very much political, and what's the win and how does this come out? And I think there's a very good case to be made that, if he could have got a deal that looked so much better than Obama's, and, maybe he would have done that. But when it was clear that's not in the cards, then it's like, well, maybe I want to be the president who, was in power when the Islamic Republic fell. And I think
Mhm.
this explains why we moved to these more expansive regime change goals, because now it's very clear this is what he's after. It's not clear what he'll get, but that seems to be what now the objective is.
So, you've written and studied extensively escalatory cycles in the Middle East. That is, how an attack on Iran may beget Iran attacks throughout the region, and how that may spiral. This is, a core of what I've read from you over the last many years now, and why I love speaking with you so frequently about these issues, because you've really kind of gotten in the weeds of this key issue and these key dynamics, which we're now seeing unfold throughout the region. So, what do you make of Iran's decision to strike back against not only Israel and American targets in the region, but also Gulf countries in the region, and not simply military targets in those Gulf countries, not simply like American bases in the Gulf, but also civilian targets as well, as we've seen in the UAE, Bahrain, and Kuwait. Uh, how do you explain that, and what do we know thus far about their targeting?
Well, it's certainly very opaque. First of all, Iranian leaders and military leaders in particular are getting picked off by the hour. So it's hard to keep up with what's going on. But I would say I think it's one of the most surprising aspects of what's unfolded over the last I think we're now closer to 48 hours by the time it started Israel time, when they launched the first assault. But uh, yes, we expected the Iranians to attack. They made it very clear, they did not hide it, that if the U.S. this buildup was no secret. The threat of force was
Mhm.
happening for many weeks now, and it's the U.S. puts. I think people are suggesting, and it's likely true. We have 150 aircraft, aircraft carriers, massive military force. Looks like the most military force employed in the region since 2003. Granted, it's not a ground operation, but still massive force. Um, so I think it was very clear the Iranians made it clear that if they are attacked, anybody is fair game that helps the Americans. So the Gulf states are, of course, U.S. allies. We have bases in the region. But what's surprising is the attacks that are getting to the civilian infrastructure in the Gulf, and especially given that in recent years the Iranians and the Gulf states have been repairing relations, and the Gulf states were their best bet to prevent this war to begin with. The Gulf states were
Mhm.
actively lobbying, including Saudi Arabia, others, lobbying the Trump administration. Don't do this. We're worried about what a war will entail. We're worried about chaos and instability and things spilling over the border and disrupting our own countries. Don't do this. And clearly, their argument did not work. But the idea that the Iranians would then risk rupturing those ties with a retaliation of this nature, which cannot be, the previous rounds of retaliation, for example, in June, were kind of choreographed with the retaliation. Iran did hit Qatar with ballistic missiles. It was a choreographed, no injuries. It was expected. It was messaged. This is different, right? This is the tempo's faster, more extensive. I think the only thing that really explains it is that uh, Trump has moved to more maximalist goals, but the Iranians are now, and they've even said it explicitly, in existential mode. This is what we feared most. I think that the thing about previous escalation cycles is there was always a feeling there could be an off ramp, if there was something still to gain, if there was something that would, incentivize you to move in that way. Now it's looking very difficult to see where that incentive would be. If you think no matter what we do, we're on the target list. So I think this is why we're really in new territory right now. And we don't know. I think the key issue in everything happening now is we don't know a lot. I mean, we don't know.
Mhm.
And war is unpredictable. That's the other thing you learn from previous escalation. And miscalculation is always in the cards. So the Iranians could have been calculating, probably inaccurately, that this will help pressure Trump because it will increase the cost. He doesn't want to look, he's never wanted these costly wars supposedly, and so this will increase the pressure, and the Gulf states will continue to pressure him to back down. But what it could do is just move the Gulf states even closer to the U.S. I think I saw, I don't know, you should, for your viewers, verify this, that the Saudis are even considering joining
I
retaliation. And if
saw
that's
that
happened,
too. Yeah.
yeah, that's big. And if that happens, that's a big, so far they've just kind of been taking it. But if they get in the fight, it's already a regional war. Okay, so this is only increasing the escalatory dynamic of this. So likely the Iranians are miscalculating, but I guess when you're in existential mode, you do whatever you think it takes,
Yeah.
and that's kind of the least of your concern. So I think that's kind of where we're at with that.
So I completely take your point, and this sense that what is happening is an existential threat to the Iranian regime. I think is well received within the Iranian regime. Also, granted, there are things we don't know that might be happening behind the scenes, but it
Right.
appears to be like the most logical kind of interpretation from Iran's perspective of what they're facing. So, given that, what would you expect from Iran next? If truly this is existential, what are options available to them to lash out and help, prevent, from Iran's perspective, the regime from collapsing?
I think we can expect more of the same. I think their ultimate objective is to survive. And because in conflicts, asymmetric conflicts, and obviously Iran is the far weaker power, in terms of both Israel and the US, and the combination of the two, and add Saudis to the mix, it's no contest, obviously. But an asymmetric conflict, survival is victory. And so the question is, will the regime already, if you knock out the supreme leader, you could, and Trump may say this, he may say, that's it, I got rid of the Islamic Republic, that's it. Now, in practice, it's not the end of the Islamic Republic yet. There's still a process to elect a new supreme leader. We'll see if that happens. There's a transition council at the moment. And it's I'm sure most likely quite a chaotic, although they've planned for this situation. But they're aiming to survive. My guess is that they'll launch whatever they can. What they'll want to do is deplete as many interceptors as they can to defend against the ballistic missiles and incoming assaults happening, that they're attacking across the region in Israel. And today, by the way, it looks like there was also a major casualty toll in Israel. I think 9 killed and
Mhm.
dozens, if not up to 60, wounded or injured, along with the 3 U.S. Casualties today. I think there's been 1 in the UAE. I don't have all up to date data, but I think that's where we're at. So the cost, it's growing, and so I think this is the Iranian play. They want to increase the cost, and they want to deplete the U.S. interceptors, and that this will create also more political pressure in the United States. I don't think they read U.S. politics very well. I don't think they read Israel very well. They've made many mistakes in the past. Probably the biggest mistake was their direct attack in Israel in April of 2024, which set the whole tit for tat and crossing of red lines in the first place. But I think, their assumption is that Trump doesn't want a long drawn out war, that the longer this goes on, the more political heat he'll take from, Democrats, but even within his own party, especially if things really start going south. So I think that's probably the Iranians' play, survive as long as they can, show the regime is still in place, whatever remnants are left, show that there's a transition. We'll see if that really works. We'll see if the IRGC takes over. We'll see if they're still the supreme leader. All of this we don't know, but they're going to want to show some semblance of a regime is still there. Because basically, I think, this isn't, they're Iran experts who really know the domestic situation much better than me. But, just as a logical thing, if everyone around you is getting killed and, this idea, and Trump in his original post was like, oh, we'll give you amnesty, lay down your arms. Why would they have any confidence? This is not Venezuela where there was like a well-arranged thing. And, in Venezuela, we weren't killing everybody around Maduro, right? I mean, it was like you captured one guy, you got him out. Literally now the U.S. is and Israel and I don't know exact division of labor, but basically killing all top military leaders and now political. And Trump actually today in an interview with The Atlantic even suggested the U.S. killed some of the negotiators that were trying to negotiate a new nuclear deal through the Amanis as, right before the launch of these attacks.
Mhm.
So if you're killing all the leadership, if you're sitting in Tehran and you're vested in this regime, I wouldn't have a lot of confidence that if you give up your arms and you give up your power, that you're likely to survive. So I think that's kind of probably where things are. And the question is, how long can they last?
Mhm.
And I think that's the gambit. The gambit is, I guess the theory Netanyahu and Trump are suggesting and others is that, the Iranian people will rise up because they showed through these protests they want this regime gone. So that they believe this was a moment of opportunity, an operational window to act where they were able to target the top leadership, including the supreme leader, right at the outset, and that kind of let the chips fall. And that's the hope. And I don't think it's particularly realistic, but that's the gambit.
Yeah, I mean, you started our conversation by noting that this is just like a very personalistic war. This is Trump's war. So presumably the Iranians are thinking that, this is Trump's war. He could end it anytime. He can just declare victory as he did after the summer strikes against the Iran nuclear facilities. Now that, the Ayatollah has been killed, he could say, yep, we did regime change. That's
Yeah.
it, like we'll stop now. And presumably for Iran, like the longer that they could last and the more tolls that they inflict upon Americans in particular and American service members and American interests, the more incentives Trump has to declare victory and move on.
I, that is a scenario that I could see playing out. I mean, again, hard to know because of unpredictability. I should say that while I say it's Trump's war, I mean, it is the Islamic Republic of Iran is not popular. I mean, my whole book
No.
is about how unpopular it is in the U.S. foreign policy establishment and beyond, and why it's so difficult to have thought about any other direction with them for so many years. So, it's not, but the idea that he launched this war with no preparation in the American public, no main debate, not even in the State of the Union last week. I mean, there wasn't even a separate speech to tell the American people why you would put our military forces in harm's way. Also, American citizens, if there are terrorism incidents. I mean, there'll be a lot of extremism. The consequences, whether this war ends tomorrow or not, the consequences are going to linger and they're not likely to be good for Americans. So, if you're going to do all those things, you should usually, you think, explain it. Even the Iraq war, it wasn't a very good justification. In fact, it
Mhm.
ended up to be a false justification.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, there was an attempt. So in that sense, so again, hitting Iran is popular. He's not going to get a lot of critique for it, but it was very much his war and the decision. Many advising that, think about this. And again, there's a reason no previous president did it, but he always puts things in very personal terms. So even when he announced this campaign, he said, I did what no other president can do. So in that sense, I do think it's very, because Netanyahu on his own could not have done this. So this is really, at the end of the day, he has to own this and all the consequences, and we all will live with it. But this is his. But you're right. In that sense, he could just declare, and this is the thing about Trump, he can change his mind. And one day we don't know. There is no strategy. There is no plan. It's whatever is in his head, whatever he's convinced of at the moment. And then everyone else is adapting to it because there's not a normal process happening. So, yeah, he could basically say that killing the supreme leader was it. I mean, clearly it wasn't it because U.S. is continuing to strike today. The Israelis, no doubt, are aware of this potential outcome. And clearly Netanyahu would not be on board with ending this before there really is actual regime change, but they'd live with it. And so the Israelis are likely pushing to get as much military capabilities degraded as quickly as possible. So that's probably the game plan right now. Maybe Trump said, I'll give this a week, who knows? But it's unlikely between the political context and between the military realities, the constraints I mentioned earlier, that this could go too long. So he could potentially do that. The question is, what does Trump himself think he can live with? Because now I think, given this is his second term, his age, so forth, it looks like he's really looking at these legacy issues. So it's like, I did Venezuela, I did Iran, Cuba's in the mix, right? So what is he willing to live with that can say, I really did something with Iran that nobody else did? And if he could say, look, it's killing the leadership, it's killing the supreme leader, the symbol of the revolution, and whatever comes after, they may say they're still the Islamic Republic, but they're just a shell of their former self, and America won. It's possible.
Mhm.
Again, I don't think the Israelis will be perfectly comfortable. The region, the wider region's not going to likely be terribly comfortable. And of course, the Iranian people are the ones who always lose out because they pay the price. They get it from all sides.
So you mentioned earlier that this is fundamentally like an asymmetric conflict in which
Mhm.
Iran is just much weaker compared to the United States and Israel, potentially soon to include Saudi Arabia. We don't know. One tool of asymmetric warfare from the weaker power is terrorism. Um, should Americans be potentially prepared for, you know, terrorist style attacks in the United States or against American interests abroad? And is that like a tool in Iran's toolbox?
It's certainly a tool. We saw it over the history of the relationship. It's been used usually through militant groups they support, particularly Hezbollah, which is quite weakened, right? So traditional actors that have used it have done these things in the past. I am not, you would need better intelligence to understand what threat there would be to the homeland. My guess is we're talking more in terms of potentially Europe. There could be cells. Again, I'm not speaking with any authority, but just in terms of what the realm of possibility where we've seen things in the past. There have been terrorist attacks historically in Latin America, the very famous tragic bombing in Argentina. So linked to Iran, there was a terrorist attack in Saudi Arabia, Kobar Towers. There was the Marine barrack bombings. These were military sites, but these things have been, it's possible, assassinations and so forth. I would think that the appetite would be higher now for those things. That said, if Trump just basically declares victory and kind of closes us up, there's going to be the focus is likely to be internal survival, closing ranks inside and not stir the pot with some major terrorist incident that would, bring the US back with full force. So again, I think it depends on how the current war is going to evolve. But certainly if it's not stopping and the Iranians continue to feel like this is their last stand, things could get activated. And I should also add, not all of this is necessarily directed in some centralized way. This kind of killing and the fact that, it's happening with Israel, and let's not forget the context of the Gaza war and views in the region of what Israel's done in Gaza, and this idea that Israel is kind of acting with impunity across the region. There's perceptions, bombing Lebanon, even bombing Doha. I mean, this was like, there's a, so this could, the idea the U.S. has joined with Israel, as much as there's, I think, widespread antipathy for the Islamic Republic among wide segments of the Arab world. There are Shia populations, they're in the minority, and killing the supreme leader, he's not just a political figure, he's a religious figure, and the killing being done by Israel. I mean, part of me wonders whether, Supreme Leader wanted, I mean, it's hard to know. He probably wanted to survive, but, he didn't evacuate Tehran. He's,
He
was
wasn't
he
in a
sick, I
bunker.
think?
He was
He wasn't,
killed in
but
his
so
home
like, is this
office.
what he wanted? I'm going to get killed by Israel and maybe this would activate, I don't know, but, these things are not implausible. So it's not even a question of, whoever's left of the Iranian leadership is directing terrorist attacks, but it could just be a decentralized kind of thing where there's so much anger that it could lead to incidents, lone wolf, all kinds of things. So yeah, I think the bottom line is we should be very alert, and I think there's a lot of actually warnings coming from the U.S. government to American citizens abroad and so forth, and certainly in the Middle East to be alert because it's not out of the realm of possibility.
Um, what have we seen from the Houthis thus far? Any statements or
Mm,
actions? You mentioned earlier, the axis of resistance has been severely degraded over the last year and a
mhm.
half. you know, what remains of the axis, the Houthis, to the extent they are, part of that axis, are probably the strongest regional, actor that is potentially like a proxy for Iran. I don't think they're like a proxy. I think that their relations are a little more complicated than that. It's not like the same kind of relationship that Iran had, say, with Hezbollah, but they're a heavily armed group on the Red Sea. Like, what have we seen thus far?
Yeah, I haven't been following that angle as closely, so I don't wanna mislead any
Hmm.
of your listeners. The last I saw that they did threaten they would retaliate, but it is yet to happen, as far as I can see. As far as I saw up until we're talking, again, things are moving quickly. It's certainly a theater that was very active during the Gaza war. They basically shut down shipping routes and attacks in the Red Sea, disrupting maritime traffic. And by the way, this is in conjunction with the Iranian Revolutionary Guard already closing or trying to stop traffic through the Straits of Hormuz. So I think you're already 20% of world's energy, oil, goes through that narrow passage. And I think I saw today oil is already up like 10%. And so you've got a lot of things that can go wrong from the Houthis in Yemen. But they also could hit Israel directly. We saw that during the Gaza war. Their missiles actually can reach Israel now. So that is another theater to watch. I don't think it's activated yet. I think they have their own dilemmas back at home and challenges. They're probably the most lethal group that's remaining, along with some of the militia forces in Iraq. Hezbollah and Hamas are the least likely. So I think if we're going to look for contenders for who could respond, but, of course, all of these groups want to survive themselves. So I think they're probably also going to watch and see, are we going to bat for a leadership that's going to be there the next day? And, there's reason to be uncertain about
Mhm.
that, obviously.
So again, we're speaking 48 hours ish after the start of this. Events, things are moving very
36.
fast. What are you looking towards? What are there any like particular statements or events or you know kinetic actions like that will suggest to you how this might unfold?
I think Trump is in the driver's seat, so everything will be. I don't think Iran's ability to do much more than they're doing. Of course, I think a lot of it will just be a question of what they're able to get through. So, what we should look for are mass casualty events. If any of these missiles actually lead to, like what we started to see today, actual deaths, killings of U.S. military personnel, of Israeli civilians, casualties in GCC countries. So we should be looking at that. Um, I think whether Saudi Arabia engages is going to be a big deal. We should also look to see how the succession unfolds within Iran, how much that is suggesting that this leadership is still surviving in any kind of form. Um, and of course, we need to look to see if we really do see mass uprising in the streets of Iran, and whether, again, this was the question for many weeks since the protests started in early January, late December. Regime fracturing. Are there any defections? Are there any sign that there is a splintering happening within Iran? We have not seen that yet, but that's something that's going to be very important to look toward. And then I think, but at the end of the day, because this ultimately was Trump's decision, and he could end it. And so looking at his statements, which are all over the map, so it's never easy, but I think that will be a very, very strong signal. And the other thing is, if the tempo really goes up, again, I think the Israelis are going to be incentivized to do as much as they can, knowing there may not be as long of a window as they hope. Um, but if it really goes up, that's usually a sign when maybe a ceasefire, Trump will just declare the ceasefire, mission accomplished kind of thing, and then maybe the fighting will stop. But the real dilemma I'm concerned about is what's next. What's the day after? Uh, Even if this, hopefully this war ends, because we could have a lot more death and destruction than we've even seen in under 2 days. Uh, and we don't want to get to that catastrophic point. What's going to come next? What's becoming of Iran? How is this going to reshape the region? There's no question this is not going to have lingering impacts on the neighborhood. And then the world, to your topic of your podcast, how is this going to affect how China's looking at Taiwan? Stability of the Gulf. This is, airports have been closed for 2 days. Dubai. I mean, these are countries that are um, absolutely dependent on international trade, commerce, tourism, investment. This is very unsettling situation. How long will this linger? I mean, these are questions we have to be thinking about. What's going to happen the day after? And if Trump does just declare victory, after a week, and the regime is still there, then we have the same question we were asking back in June, which is, when's the next one? Because the story is never over. So again, I think there's really at this point almost more questions than answers.
Well, to that end, my last question for you is: there's like a question I didn't ask that you wanted to answer, or a point you wanted to make before I let you go?
I don't think so. You always are very comprehensive. Sometimes I think of one, but but I think it's just all of this is so overwhelming. We're all getting hit with so much.
Mm,
Um, that I can't think of any new ones right now, but I'm
well,
sure when we meet again, there'll be more.
as always, thank you
Unfortunately.
so much for just giving listeners broader context for understanding these events as they unfold throughout the Middle East. Thank you so much, Dahlia. Thank you all for joining live, and for those of you who listen later, thank you. Please share this. Please become a paid subscriber to help me keep doing this. So thank you all, and thank you, Dahlia. And I'll be following your work for the next, as I have for the last several years. I will be following your work well into the future. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Mark.
All
Take
right.
care.
Okay. Bye, everyone.